Welcome to Movie Speeching. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take good care. The Mandela Effect is the name of the movie. Please like and subscribe to get every update. Video game designer Brendan said scientists put rats in mazes to discover how organisms use memory to learn, adapt, and develop, and how they create internal maps of the world. And he explains that he is researching, and he constantly reads these studies because he uses these principles to design games and points out that without memory humanity can achieve nothing. And one day Brendan goes to the beach with his wife Claire and his daughter Sam, and the two have a good time, and after a short nap, Sam says she's going clamming with her Curious George toy, and she promises she won't go in the water. And then while Sam is distracted by the shell and the waves carry away the monkey, she goes into the water to retrieve him. And unfortunately, the sea is too strong and she can't come back. And the family gives their parents their full support during the funeral, but Brendan and Claire remain devastated. And Claire still feels this is not real, and Brendan can barely work because he is always crying in her daughter's room. And then, a few months later, Claire decided it was time for her to move in and started cleaning out Sam's room. But Brendan isn't ready yet, and when he begs his wife to make everything right, he quickly panics. And when he picked up his daughter's favorite book, he noticed that the title was Berenstain Bears and that it was spelled with an A, even though from memory it was spelled with an E. And later that night, Brendan couldn't sleep and suddenly heard a noise. And he then enters the kitchen with a baseball bat and almost attacks him, only to find his brother-in-law and Matt raiding the refrigerator. And so they talk over midnight snack, and Brendan asks Matt about the title of the book, and Matt thinks of it too, and he's happy to hear that it's spelled E, and Brendan still can't sleep, so he searches the internet for an explanation and finds thousands of articles about it. And many people have the same memories as him and think it's a conspiracy, but eventually Brendan encounters a phenomenon called the Mandela Effect, where entire groups share false memories, and they usually denounce alternate timelines or parallel universes, and their name comes from the fact that many people remember Mandela, who died in prison. And in the next morning, as Claire finally prepares to go back to work, Brendan notices a photo of his family on the fridge, and the photo is from Griffith Observatory, and when Brendan asks, Claire remembers it and confirms that the photo was taken there. And however, Brendan remembers taking the exact same photo at the Pacific Science Center instead, and Claire thinks she's just confused and goes back to work. And Brendan then shows Matt what he has found and the Mandela Effect, including a complete explanation and many examples such as Mandela's death, Darth Vader quotes, and the spelling of Looney Tunes. Brendan is convinced that they are bouncing between parallel realities or are part of a simulation, but Matt doesn't take him seriously. And the next day, Brendan delved deeper into this phenomenon, watching a number of documentaries on topics such as string theory and the possibility of real matrices. And then Brendan takes lots of notes and becomes obsessed with the subject, and perhaps it is a way to occupy his mind and ignore sadness. And then one afternoon, Brendan visited the priest and asked him why God would take the life of a child and Sam, and the priest then explains that Sam's death was not God's plan or desire, but simply a matter of free will, which many consider to be God's greatest gift to humanity. And then when Brendan returns home, he begins research and free will as part of his obsession. And then sometime later, Brendan meets up with Matt again and they continue to talk about this. And Matt then explains that he consulted a friend of his who is a neurologist, and she explains this and says that our brains are not perfect, meaning memories are messed up, and that we don't need outside information. And he explained that many gaps are being filled. And however, Brendan stubbornly refuses and accepts that it is just a coincidence. And later, at dinner, Claire admits that she is worried because Brendan has become so withdrawn lately and insists that he share his problems. And Brendan asks her to describe Monopoly and the man, and Claire says he has a monocle, but when she checks the box for the game, the little man doesn't have any, and it was on my face. And Brendan then pulls out Sam's Curious George and the book that says the monkey had a tail, and declares that both the picture and Sam and his stuffed animal had tails. And Claire doesn't like his daughter's death and is treated as such, but Brendan presses on, pointing out that after the funeral Claire even said it didn't seem real. And then when he started talking about reality changing, Claire snapped and scolded Brendan for refusing to move on and instead pouring his grief into this stupid obsession. And then after some time, Brendan and Claire go on a double trip with Matt and his new friends. And Brendan, lost in thought and barely paying attention to the conversation, tries to run away to a bar, but Matt reminds him that he and Claire need to support each other. And then Brendan admits it's true and returns to the table. And as soon as Brendan got home, he went back to his computer and researched simulations and theories that we live in a computer-programmed reality. And then Brendan's notes become more extensive, and he begins managing the board in a desperate attempt to find evidence of parallel universes and universes where Sam is still alive. And he then watches videos of celebrities such as Elon Musk, Neil, and deGrasse Tyson talking about the subject, and finally comes across a man named Roland Fuchs who is said to be trying to prove the simulation. But the video he found on the website is no longer working, so he has to rely on piracy and websites that keep backups of it. And the file you are downloading is corrupted, but I solved the problem using special software. The video shows Dr. and Fuchs giving a lecture on simulation theory, but unfortunately it gets destroyed again, leaving Brendan with nothing. And undeterred, Brendan searches for the place Fuchs has recently worked and records a video and message. And days pass and Brendan doesn't hear from Fuchs, so he goes to the university to contact the doctor directly. But Fox is too busy to listen to random fan chatter. And later that night, Brendan tries to be a better husband and begins to flirt with Claire, but she stops midway through when she thinks she hears Sam calling out to her. And then, frustrated, Claire tells him to see a grief counselor. And then the next day, as promised, Brendan showed up to Fuchs, not his advisor, and persuaded him to give him a few minutes. And Fuchs explains that the Mandela Effect is simply a false memory, but he also believes that they are breadcrumbs left by simulations, and that we are living through glitches after system updates. And Brendan then points out that reality is fair and computer code should be hackable, but Fox thinks this is ridiculous and takes him to college. And then on the way there, they discuss the possibilities and how the world only exists because consciousness and being C. And then Brendan likens it to a video game, where you only load areas when the player enters them, and the rest of the time those areas don't exist and don't exist. And then instead of hacking the simulation, you should overload the simulation to overload the processor. And then only a very powerful machine could do something like that or something like that. And Fuchs revealed that this university has a quantum computer, and they enter the lab together. But as Fuchs is explaining how to enter the code, Dr. and Manning does not and acknowledges Brendan's presence. And the two soon return to the house with the doctor, where Fuchs explains that he thinks a flaw in the system caused the simulation to try to stop him, and reminds Brendan that the idea is a dangerous one. And then Brendan worries about whether the simulation is about leisure or about power, comparing the nature behind it to political and corporate power. And then later that night, Brendan wakes up from a dream in which Sam dies, and again hears the phone call of her looking for him. And then, running into Sam's room, he suddenly makes a mistake and sees a figure and a shadow disappearing. And then you try to go for a drive to clear your head, but you can't stop seeing the world as quantum computers and giant strings of code connected to computers. And then eventually he falls asleep in his car and wakes up in an alley downtown. And then suddenly you hear a horrible high-pitched sound and reality sets in and you scream in pain as it explodes, only to suddenly blink awake and wake up in your usual bed. And then when Brendan leaves her room, he is shocked to see Sam in her room, and Claire comes and drags her into the bathroom. And however, when I followed her, I found that her wife was just brushing her teeth. Brendan thinks he is crazy and Claire does her best to comfort him. And Brendan then goes to the library, gets some books on quantum computing, and starts writing code that could overload the simulation. And then Brendan spends the next few days just programming, which worries Claire. And then one night, Sam shows up in her parents' room and she crawls into bed because she had a nightmare. And Brendan slept peacefully next to her, only to wake up in the morning to an empty bed. And thinking it was a dream, Brendan goes downstairs to find Sam there, as if nothing had happened. And Claire and Matt also treat them normally, and Brendan asks everyone he knows for confirmation of his suspicions. And reality has been rewritten as no one remembers that Sam died. And he then tries to discuss this with Fuchs, but Fuchs won't answer his phone. And Brendan wants to stop writing his code now that the simulation has given him back his life and his daughter, but he doesn't care. And I'm glad Sam is back. And the family spent a lot of time together and were very happy, until one night when Claire woke up from a terrible nightmare. She was in a terrible state, and she swears she's fine. But the next day Brendan notices his breakfast is on fire and Claire leaves. And then determined to cheer her up, Brendan goes to paint pottery with her family. And then suddenly she notices a crack in the pot and Claire becomes aggressive and ends up breaking things and the floor just because it's not the color she wanted. And Brendan decides to go home and tries to convince Claire, but Claire keeps staring at Sam and panics, saying that girls shouldn't be there. And fearing that the change in reality will make him and his wife sick, Brendan asks Matt to take care of Sam and rushes to Fox's house, only to be greeted by the doctor's wife. And then it turns out that he removed himself 2 months ago because he wasn't taken seriously by the scientific community. And then just when Brendan thought he had met Fox only 2 days ago, there was a crack in his glass. And he considers this also a sign of simulation. And determined to make things right, Brendan rushed to his home and started working on the code over and over again. And then he also records the video for his family in case the simulation kills him like he thinks it does, and it ends up killing Fox. And while Brendan is at work, Matt takes care of Claire, who has become catatonic. And then when the code is finally completed, Brendan goes to the university and tries to access the quantum computer, but is stopped by Manning, who tries to call security. And Brendan jumps at him to stop him, but accidentally pushes too hard and Manning hits him in the head, killing him instantly when he lands on the ground. And Brendan feels very guilty, but still takes Manning's keycard and continues his job. Reaching the computer, Brendan embeds the code into a USB stick and watches the numbers pass by as the lights on the computer flash. And then soon the machine starts making strange noises, so Brendan rushes outside, only to find the parking lot empty and his car gone. And then in the blink of an eye, he found himself receiving a call from his wife on the bus saying he wasn't feeling well. And at that time, he noticed that there was something wrong with the female passenger's face, and as she was walking on the floor of the bus, he noticed that a couple near her also had something wrong with their faces. And then as Brendan gets off the bus and runs through the city, he notices all kinds of commotion, and the hours of the day are constantly changing, the colors of the trees are changing, and there are 2 moons in the sky. And finally, Brendan comes home, runs to his wife and daughter, and hugs them tightly, while everything around him and his surroundings becomes strange. And then when the 2 moons collide in the sky before everything goes black, Claire's face becomes distorted and she screams in pain. And then, as the universe starts over again and again, passing through dinosaurs, lost civilizations, wars, and the usual important moments in human history, a code appears on the screen. And then when the reboot finally ends, Brendan is happy to be back on the beach with his family. And then this time, when Sam says she's going to look for the shell, Brendan forces her to leave the curious ship and George behind, and Sam saves her life. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.